As I've found myself growing as a Christian, or gotten more mature and looked back on things I say and do less or more in the past, things I look back and embarrassed about. And when I think unhealthy things are too prominent in the way I conduct myself, I realize more and more what makes sense. And I'm going to play a clip from Leighton Flowers, and I think this is exactly dead on. This is how Christians should think. Because whenever I'm not thinking in this way, I end up doing something I regret or I'm embarrassed about, or I get off track. And what he's going to say is the exact sort of attitude that I hear and see from Chris Date as well. And Chris Date is very much a Calvinist, heavily a Calvinist. And obviously Leighton Flowers is not a Calvinist. And the way Chris Date shows this in the way he conducts Rethinking Hell ministry is the same kind of notion. And two people, justification by faith, they both believe in justification by faith from two totally different perspectives. And they both conduct themselves with these kinds of principles. And I think it's what Christ would want, and how Christ is teaching Christians to act and how to be. So I'm going to play the clip, and I endorse what he's saying here 100%. And I think people need to remember this.
James White. I invited him to a church that I was a pastor at. He was on a stage with him. I don't have to defend everything James White ever says now, just because I shared a stage with him. I platformed him. Okay. To assume that somebody has to become the apologetic defender of anyone they have on their program is just, it's a form of, and I'm not saying you're doing this, James, I'm just answering the question. It's a form of ad hominem. It's a form of trying to attack the messenger. Do you believe that your passion to point out the errors of Calvinism has allowed you to find and even side with those who have questionable practices, beliefs, such as N.T. Wright, Andy Stanley? You might include some of the open theists that I've had on the show, like Brian Wagner, Warren McGrew, these kinds of things. I'm glad you asked that question, James, because I think that gets to a valuable point with regard to our interactions with each other. And so what he's asking is, do you think your passion to discredit Calvinism can cause you to side with or to platform, I've heard it said, people who have questionable beliefs or practices?
It doesn't make any sense.
What'd you find?
All of these books are under $5 at thriftbooks.com.
Well, the fact that I'm even willing to debate a Calvinist or have a determinist on the program like Chris Date or other Calvinists on the program, many of you might say the same thing. You're platforming in them. You're friendly with them. You're a colleague with Chris Date. You work at the same school and teach at the same school that he does. Does that mean I believe and support everything Chris Date says and does? No, we have disagreements among each other. And so this is where Christian, I think, maturity and charity comes in, where we're able to believe the best about somebody else, work with them despite the fact that they see things differently than we do. I haven't heard or seen many things that would be questionable with regard to N.T. Wright, so I'm not sure what that's talking about. If there's a particular belief that N.T. Wright holds to that you want to bring up, I would have to look at that. I've talked to you about open theism and some of the various caricatures of open theism versus what I've seen Warren and Brian talk about, because I was very, very harsh about open theists when I first heard it portrayed as God doesn't know the future, versus the way I heard Brian and Warren put it later in their discourses and listening to them. And though I still don't agree with their take on it, their take is a lot more reasonable than what I originally thought it was, even though I don't agree with it still. And even still, even if it was the.
So I would agree. This is one of those things where, like, what are the implications? Does it necessitate that if you believe this, it means this? You hear a lot of open theists, and some of them say wild things. But Warren McGrew, Idol Killer's channel, he makes a very good, reasonable case why it's not even necessarily a lot of the things. Like, I've heard debates, and then they'll go really far when they feel like they have to with open theism. But I would suggest that what Warren McGrew describes, I know I haven't thought it through really well as far as, yeah, but still you have to affirm this, that, or the other thing. But he makes a really good case for what it is and what it isn't in several videos I've watched of his. So I would recommend that before you go around saying open theists can't be Christian. I'm not sure that you should say that. And so far, what I have heard from him, and I would say I'm with, at this point, I would agree with Flowers. A lot of people say, well, if you believe this, this, and this, you have to be an open theist or Calvinist. And I don't think that's necessary. Everybody has to put a mystery somewhere or whatever regarding our understanding of how God works, regarding his foreknowledge, predestination, and our freedom to be responsible and guilty in such a way that God isn't guilty of sins. That's the primary thing. Some open theists think you have to be an open theist for that to be the case. Some other people think you have to be a determinist. Some people don't think either. I'm in that camp. And but a lot of the things people presume that open theists believe are not necessarily the case. Everybody can have something to be pointed at saying that doesn't make sense. You know, God's guilty if you're a Calvinist of sin. If you're an open theist, God's guilty of not having foreknowledge. And if you don't affirm either of those, each of those other sides will say you have to be one of us, or it doesn't work. You're playing the middle. Everybody's playing the middle to let something off the hook, or a case can be made for that. All I know is, seems like God knows the future, and it seems like God is more. So God knows the future more than the open theist suggests, and he is more distanced from the cause of sin, the Calvinist says. So that's where I'm at. But Warren McGrew makes a good case for a not Bible denying version of open theism. I'm not sure exactly what motivates that. His reason for affirming it as he does, but it seems way more reasonable than you hear people say. Anyway, back to what he's saying here. I actually like his channel, so I like Warren McGrew's channel. He strikes me as a Christian, a real Christian in his conduct and attitude. So
Original take, God just doesn't know the future, like he's learning as we go or something like that. And I'm not saying those guys believe that, because they've actually said that they believe God knows all possible contingencies of future and all these kinds of things. And it sounds very much like Molinist, but there's a more dynamic in time perspective that's taking place versus God actualizing a world in time past. Again, all philosophy, they're philosophers by trade. Okay. So all philosophical explanations to questions I don't think the Bible gives us clear answers to. I don't think the deterministic philosophical answer is biblically tenable, nor do I think it's logically tenable. Therefore, I reject it. I don't believe that many of the claims of what the open theist is saying is biblically defensible, because I do believe God has exhaustive knowledge of the future free choices of creatures, and I don't think that stops them from being free. I don't have a problem accepting that philosophically. And the fact that some people do, that's what free will is all about. They have free will to believe differently. I just don't think that philosophical difference is enough to split churches over, or denominations over, or to cast somebody out the kingdom for. The Andy Stanley issue is a totally different.
I agree with that. I feel like that I have, from my own inner cockles of my own agency, sourcehood, have freely decided to determine that I don't believe Calvinism or open theism is ultimately correct. I've libertarianly freely chosen to determine that both of those are incorrect, at least at this time. I may refrain from that belief in the future, but for now I affirm it freely. And then when I go to make a thought, I determine that that's what I'm going to freely believe.
One. I have defended Andy Stanley's approach to apologetics because he's not a presuppositionalist. And so many of the same accusations that are brought against Andy Stanley are brought against William Lane Craig, and even R.C. Sproul, believe it or not, because he's not a presuppositional apologist. And so evidentialists and classical apologists often get criticized by the presuppositionalists in their approach, their methodological approach. And so many of the quotes that are pulled out of context by Andy Stanley and used against him are about apologetic methodologies. And I've defended him on those points. And I've also defended him on sociological points, obviously, because we're in agreement with each other. Does that?
So basically he's saying just because he defends him on certain things doesn't mean he determines on everything he says. Just because somebody's defending somebody, they're only defending them on the particular points they're defending them on. Because nobody agrees with everybody on anything, even within the same church. So I'll leave it there because I don't want to play his video on my channel. But I was mainly wanting to point out that what he said at the beginning has to be, it's right. Because I know if you do not operate that way, you make an idiot of yourself. I know from experience. And you grow as a person when you're in charity. If the problem is there's just lots of people that are immature and they want to, because they're scared, they want to hold you back. And because you might be scared a little bit, it's easier to just not have charity and have characterize people to feel like you're noble or doing something right, when what the call is to be charitable and love each other, and then also have discernment. Most people's discernment is total garbage, but it's mostly motivated by their fear. It's hard to challenge certain ideas you have that give you comfort. It's easier to condemn other people and to tribalize. And as I get older and I embarrass myself or I grow, it's always towards that idea that's better and away from the other way of thinking. So I pray that you learn that sooner than later.